27 Uncomfortable Moments from Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night TV without question. He had fast humor, a warm smile, and perfect timing that brought America together every evening. But beneath his smooth appearance and easy conversation were times that made even the unshakable Carson feel awkward, uncomfortable, and sometimes lose his famous calm. Today, we're revealing the moments Johnny Carson disliked the most during his 30 years hosting The Tonight Show. We'll cover guests who crossed the line and animal segments that went badly wrong. We'll look at tense confrontations and times when his carefully built image completely fell apart. These aren't just awkward TV moments. They show us the real person sitting at that desk, the side NBC bosses didn't want anyone to see. So get comfortable as we show you the rarely talked about difficult side of late-night TV's best years. These are the moments that made Johnny Carson quietly angry while he kept that well-known smile on his face. Because in entertainment, the most honest truths often come out when things don't go as planned. When you host the same show for 30 years with thousands of famous guests, awkward moments will happen. But some encounters were especially hard for Carson. These were times when his famous charm was tested completely. 27. The Joan Rivers Betrayal. In 1986, Johnny Carson experienced what he considered the ultimate betrayal from someone he had personally mentored, Joan Rivers. For years, Rivers had been Carson's permanent guest host on The Tonight Show, a position of huge honor in the entertainment world. When Rivers secretly negotiated a deal with the new Fox network to host her own competing late-night show, Carson found out through industry gossip rather than from Rivers herself. Though Rivers has always said she tried to call Carson before the news broke, Carson claimed until his death that she never did, starting one of the most infamous fights in TV history. The night before the announcement, Rivers had appeared on The Tonight Show, warmly talking with Carson while wearing the same dress she'd worn during her first appearance 21 years earlier, never mentioning her coming departure to compete directly against him. When Carson discovered the truth, he was furious. Carson's rage wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. He immediately banned Rivers from NBC entirely, refusing to ever speak to her again, despite her multiple attempts to make peace. The ban was so complete that even later Tonight Show hosts kept it out of loyalty to Carson, with Rivers not appearing on the show again until 2014, nearly a decade after Carson's death. What made this moment so painful for Carson was his deeply held value of loyalty. As a famously private person with few close professional relationships, Carson had seen Rivers as part of his inner circle. Her decision to compete against him without warning triggered his infamous cold shoulder, a punishment he never lifted for the remaining 19 years of his life. When questioned about Rivers in later years, Carson would simply change the subject or give a short no comment. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly told NBC executives, "Joan who?" when her name was mentioned. The depth of his hurt was clear in his complete refusal to ever acknowledge her existence again. 26. Wayne Newton's Threatening Confrontation. In 1980, Carson made several jokes about Wayne Newton's high-pitched voice and feminine mannerisms during his monologues. When Newton appeared as a guest in 1981, the tension was immediate and uncomfortable. Rather than promoting his latest project, Newton immediately confronted Carson about the jokes. What made the moment especially uncomfortable was Newton's barely hidden anger as he told Carson, "I don't appreciate being made fun of. I've been a gentleman long enough." According to Carson producer Peter Lasley, as quoted in the 2012 PBS documentary Johnny Carson, King of Late Night, the confrontation was even more heated during commercial breaks, with Newton making statements that Carson saw as hidden threats. What Carson found unbearable about this incident was being confronted about his comedy on his own show, especially in front of a live audience. The confrontation broke Carson's main rule: never air personal problems on camera. After this incident, Newton was reportedly on Carson's do not book list for years, though they eventually made peace. As Carson explained to his head writer, Raymond Siller, after the show, "You can say anything you want about me off camera, but on my stage, I'm in control." This encounter represented one of the rare times when Carson's carefully kept composure nearly broke on air.
25. Farrah Fawcett's rambling interview. In June 1980, Charlie's Angels star Farrah Fawcett appeared on The Tonight Show in what would become one of the most uncomfortable interviews of Carson's career. From the moment she sat down, Fawcett seemed confused, struggling to finish thoughts and rambling through disconnected stories. As documented in King of the Night, The Life of Johnny Carson by Lawrence Leamer, Carson tried repeatedly to steer the conversation back on track, but Fawcett continued to drift through wandering stories, often losing her train of thought mid-sentence. The audience grew increasingly uncomfortable, and Carson's trademark interview rhythm completely fell apart. Behind his professional smile, Carson was clearly struggling, a rare sight for a host famous for his ability to handle any situation. According to production assistant Peter Lasley in a 2012 PBS documentary, Carson was furious backstage. He felt the booking team had failed to properly check her condition before the appearance. Though alcohol rumors spread afterward, Fawcett's representatives later denied this was the cause of her behavior. What Carson found unbearable about moments like these was the complete breakdown of his carefully planned program. As a total professional, Carson took pride in keeping control, and guests who made that impossible frustrated him deeply. According to Tonight Show writer Andrew Nichols, Carson's main rule was never lose control of the show, and this interview broke that rule completely.
24. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box. In 1976, during one of comedian Don Rickles' appearances on The Tonight Show, Rickles accidentally broke Carson's prized cigarette box, a personal item that sat on Carson's desk throughout his career. While showing an anecdote, Rickles knocked over the wooden box, breaking its lid. Carson's reaction was immediate. His face tightened, and longtime viewers could see real annoyance flash across his usually composed face. Though Carson quickly recovered with humor, staffers later revealed in interviews with Carson biographer Henry Bushkin that the host was genuinely upset backstage. "That cigarette box was one of Johnny's personal items he brought from home," recalled Tonight Show producer Fred DeCordova in a 1994 interview. "He valued it greatly, and though he played it off on air, he was genuinely bothered by Rickles breaking it." What Carson especially disliked about this moment was the invasion of his personal space and property. Though he kept professional composure on camera, the incident shows how Carson kept clear boundaries between his personal and public life, and how uncomfortable he became when those lines were crossed. As comedy writer David Steinberg later noted in his memoir, this incident revealed a fascinating contradiction in Carson's character. Johnny could roll with almost any joke at his expense, but touch his stuff without permission, and you'd see a flash of the real man behind the host mask.
23. Charlie Callis gets banned. Comedian Charlie Callis had been a frequent guest on The Tonight Show throughout the 1970s, known for his crazy sound effects and physical comedy. During a 1982 appearance, however, Callis made a crucial mistake that earned Carson's anger. When one of Callis's jokes didn't work, Carson playfully shoved the failure with a bomb-dropping whistle sound. In response, Callis shoved Carson, crossing a physical boundary that the host did not like. Carson's reaction was quick and harsh. "Don't ever do that to me again," he said coldly, before moving on. According to widespread reports, after the show, Carson told his producers that Callis would never appear on The Tonight Show again, and he never did. What Carson especially hated about this moment was the physical invasion of his space and the disruption of the professional boundaries he kept with guests. While Carson enjoyed playful talk, physical roughhousing was a line he did not want crossed, especially on camera.
22. The Uri Geller debacle. In 1973, self-proclaimed psychic Uri Geller appeared on The Tonight Show, promising to show his supernatural abilities. What Geller didn't know was that Carson, a skilled amateur magician himself, had talked with professional magician and skeptic James Randi before the show. On Randi's advice, Carson's team prepared their own props for Geller's demonstrations, rather than letting him use his own specially prepared items. When presented with these unfamiliar props, Geller failed completely. Despite multiple attempts, Geller couldn't bend spoons, identify hidden drawings, or make a compass move, all feats he had successfully performed on other shows. As Geller made increasingly desperate excuses, Carson's skepticism became more obvious. What made this moment especially significant, and what Carson secretly enjoyed, despite his uncomfortable position, was that he had purposely set up Geller to fail. Carson deeply disliked frauds who claimed supernatural powers, and this was his calculated attempt to expose what he saw as a con. The result was very uncomfortable TV as Geller squirmed, making excuses about not feeling strong that day. Carson kept a mask of polite interest while subtly making it clear to viewers that they were watching an exposed con man. What was shocking about this incident wasn't just the on-air exposure of Geller's tricks, but what happened afterward. Despite his humiliation on The Tonight Show, Geller's career surprisingly flourished. As Geller himself later admitted, Johnny Carson's show made Uri Geller. The public saw his failure as proof he was authentic. After all, if he were just doing tricks, they would work every time. This outcome deeply frustrated Carson, who had hoped to end Geller's career as a psychic, but instead had accidentally helped it. The entire incident represented a rare instance where Carson had let his personal views influence the show's content, something he generally avoided, only to see his plan backfire badly.
21. The toilet paper panic. In December 1973, Carson made a joke in his monologue about a supposed shortage of toilet paper. "You know, we've got all sorts of shortages these days," he said, "but have you heard the latest? I'm not kidding, I saw it in the papers. There's a serious shortage of toilet paper." What Carson didn't expect was that viewers would take his joke seriously. The next day, panicked shoppers began clearing store shelves of toilet paper, creating an actual shortage that lasted for weeks. The Tonight Show had accidentally caused a nationwide panic. Carson was embarrassed by the real-world impact of his joke and issued a clarification and apology on air. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who created a false toilet paper scare," he said. "There is no shortage except for the one I caused." What Carson hated about this incident was the unintended consequences of his comedy. He took pride in understanding the power of TV, but had underestimated just how much influence his words had with the American public.
20. The broken desk. In 1987, during a typical monologue, Carson lightly tapped his pencil on his desk while making a joke about poorly maintained movie theaters. To everyone's surprise, especially Carson's, the entire desktop suddenly broke and collapsed. While the audience roared with laughter, Carson was momentarily embarrassed. The desk was his command center, a symbol of his authority on the show, and seeing it literally fall apart on air represented a loss of control. After a moment of real shock, Carson's quick wit took over as he joked, "I broke my desk. Horowitz never had this problem." He continued the show standing up while stagehands scrambled to fix the furniture. Though this moment became a beloved blooper, Carson was initially uncomfortable with the disruption to his carefully run show. The incident especially bothered him because it highlighted the aging, increasingly shaky nature of his set, something NBC had been slow to update despite the show's huge profits.
19. Charles Grodin's confrontational appearances. Actor Charles Grodin developed a unique routine for his Tonight Show appearances in the early 1990s, directly confronting and criticizing Carson himself. While partly an act, Grodin pushed boundaries in ways that visibly made the host uncomfortable. During one infamous appearance, Grodin questioned Carson's interviewing skills, saying, "You don't seem prepared for this interview. Did you even read my book?" Carson, caught off guard, struggled to stay composed as Grodin continued his critique. Though Carson eventually adapted to Grodin's confrontational style, creating a love-hate on-screen relationship that viewers enjoyed, these appearances always pushed Carson outside his comfort zone. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly said that Grodin's appearances aged him in dog years. What Carson especially disliked about these moments was having his professionalism questioned on his own show, forcing him to defend himself rather than keep his carefully built position as the one asking the questions.
18. Frank Sinatra's hostile takeover. In 1976, Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show supposedly to promote his latest album. From the moment he walked out, however, it was clear Sinatra had his own plan. Rather than following the usual interview format, Sinatra basically took over the show, deciding which topics were discussed, interrupting Carson repeatedly, and even taking over as a sort of host at points, asking Carson questions instead of answering them. For Carson, who took pride in controlling the pace and direction of his show, Sinatra's bossy presence was deeply uncomfortable. Though Carson kept his professional behavior, viewers familiar with his subtle signals could see his growing annoyance in his tightened smile and forced laughter. What made the situation especially difficult was Sinatra's status in the entertainment world. Unlike with lesser-known guests, Carson couldn't assert his authority without risking significant backlash. He was forced to give up control of his own show temporarily, something he deeply resented. Carson biographer Lawrence Leamer notes in King of the Night that this interview represented a rare instance of Carson being truly intimidated by a guest, something that bothered him greatly when he watched the show later. According to longtime NBC executive Dick Ebersol, interviewed for the Television Academy, Carson later complained, "I felt like I was a guest on my own damn show." Some of Carson's most uncomfortable moments came when guests behaved in unpredictable or confrontational ways, challenging his control of the show.
17. Ed Ames' tomahawk throw. Not all uncomfortable moments for Carson were entirely negative. In 1965, actor Ed Ames appeared on the show to demonstrate tomahawk throwing, a skill he had learned playing a Native American character on the TV show Daniel Boone. When Ames threw the tomahawk at a wooden figure, it landed directly in the figure's crotch. The audience erupted in continuous laughter that lasted for nearly a minute. While this moment is often mentioned as one of the funniest spontaneous moments in TV history, Carson was initially uncomfortable with how it played out on his relatively new show. The sexual nature of the joke pushed boundaries for 1960s TV, and Carson was briefly worried about network reaction. What made this moment complex for Carson was the tightrope walk between comedy gold and potential controversy. Though he ultimately embraced the moment's humor with his quick joke, "I didn't even know you were Jewish," Carson was momentarily thrown by the unexpectedly risque turn of events. 16. Burt Reynolds' water fight. In 1975, actor Burt Reynolds appeared on The Tonight Show and got into what started as a playful water fight with Carson. What began as light banter escalated when Reynolds dumped an entire pitcher of water onto Carson's suit. Though Carson tried to keep his good humor on camera, those familiar with his careful attention to appearance knew he was angry underneath. Carson took pride in his perfect wardrobe and polished appearance, and being soaked on national TV was his idea of a nightmare. After the commercial break, Carson appeared in new clothes but was noticeably cooler toward Reynolds for the rest of the interview. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly said, "That kind of childish stunt might work on Merv Griffin's show, but not here." 15. Tom Snyder's divorce question. In 1979, while Tom Snyder was guest hosting The Tonight Show, he made a comment about Carson's recent divorce that crossed a line. When Carson returned and learned about Snyder's remarks, he was furious. Carson fiercely protected his privacy, especially about his marriages and divorces.
Crew members reported that Carson was so angry about the incident that he considered never allowing Snyder to guest host again. What Carson especially hated about this situation was having his personal troubles discussed on his own show, the one place where he had complete control over his public image. After this incident, Carson created stricter rules about what guest hosts could and couldn't discuss.
14. The producer's wrap-it-up signal. In 1992, Carson experienced a devastating personal tragedy when his son, Ricky, died in a car accident. Upon returning to The Tonight Show after a brief absence, Carson gave a heartfelt, unplanned tribute to his son at the end of a broadcast. As Carson started speaking about his son's love of photography and how fragile life is, his longtime producer, Fred DeCordova, worried about the show running over time, gave Carson the wrap-it-up signal from off-camera. According to King of the Night, The Life of Johnny Carson by Lawrence Leamer, Carson was visibly furious at being rushed during such a deeply personal moment. The incident angered him so much that he banned the Cordova from the studio floor for the remaining months of the show's run. This was a stunning rejection of a producer who had been with him for decades. As Ed McMahon later revealed in his 1998 memoir, Here's Ed, this moment was especially painful for Carson because it forced a collision between his intensely private nature and his public role during a time of deep personal grief, something the fiercely compartmentalized host struggled to handle. 13. The Carson-Rivers professional tension. Though the major betrayal would come later, the beginnings of Johnny Carson's complicated relationship with Joan Rivers were planted years earlier. Though Rivers was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show and eventually became Carson's permanent guest host on Monday nights starting in 1983, their professional relationship had underlying tensions. Behind the scenes, Carson was increasingly uncomfortable with Rivers' growing popularity as his substitute. NBC executives had begun suggesting her name as a possible Carson replacement whenever retirement rumors spread, something that didn't sit well with the protective host. During a 1985 interview, Rivers publicly said that NBC had a list of 10 potential Tonight Show successors for Carson, and that she wasn't on it. While NBC denied such a list existed, the comment showed the awkwardness of their professional relationship. Rivers wanted recognition as a potential heir, and Carson was uncomfortable with succession planning. This professional tension would lead to the much more dramatic betrayal that would rank as Carson's most hated moment in his entire career. 12. The biting camel. In 1986, zoologist Jim Fowler brought a young camel to The Tonight Show. During the segment, Fowler encouraged Carson to feed the camel a carrot, assuring him that the animal was gentle. As Carson held out the carrot, the camel suddenly lunged forward, taking not just the carrot, but also biting Carson's fingers. Though not seriously hurt, Carson was clearly in pain and startled by the unexpected bite. What made this moment especially uncomfortable was Carson's visible struggle to stay composed while in pain. His forced smile and increasingly short interaction with Fowler made it clear to regular viewers that he was genuinely upset by the unexpected pain. Peter Lastly, Carson's longtime producer, mentioned in the 2012 documentary Johnny Carson, King of Late Night, that this incident led to Carson creating a no-feeding rule for his interactions with animals on the show, leaving such activities to the professional handlers. 11. The uncooperative chimpanzee. In 1979, animal trainer Tina Jeter brought a supposedly well-trained chimpanzee named Mr. Jiggs onto the show. The segment started pleasantly enough, with the chimp doing simple tricks and charming the audience. Things got worse when Carson tried to interact with Mr. Jiggs personally. The chimp refused to follow Carson's signals, instead wandering around the set, pulling at cables and ultimately climbing up onto the lighting rig above the studio, refusing to come down. The show had to cut to an unplanned commercial break while handlers coaxed the animal down. When the show returned, an annoyed Carson joked, "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer working with human guests." Carson especially hated this moment because it showed the biggest sin of television, losing control of your own show. His displeasure with the trainer was clear, and internal notes after the show showed stricter rules for future animal guests.
Number 10. The Elephant's Accident. In 1977, Carson welcomed an animal trainer who brought a baby elephant onto the set. Though initially charmed by the creature, things went badly when the elephant became nervous under the bright studio lights. The elephant proceeded to defecate on the studio floor extensively. As the pile grew and the studio audience roared with laughter, Carson's disgust became more and more apparent. The smell quickly filled the studio, and Carson had to move his desk to continue the show. What made this moment especially frustrating for Carson was that the incident went on for what felt like forever as stagehands struggled to clean up the mess while cameras kept rolling. Carson later created a strict rule about larger animals on the show, requiring protective floor coverings and quick access to cleanup crews. 9. The Black Panther Lunge. In 1975, animal trainer Ron Shannon brought a supposedly tame Black Panther onto The Tonight Show. Carson, trying to appear brave, approached the big cat's cage during a commercial break to get a closer look. Without warning, the panther jumped at the cage bars, swiping at Carson's face with its paw. Though the cage protected him, Carson was so startled that he visibly jumped backward and fell onto the studio floor. The audience laughed loudly as a shaken Carson went back to his desk, trying to play off his real fear. The show's director caught Carson's fall on camera, and the clip was played endlessly on blooper reels, much to Carson's embarrassment. According to Carson's longtime producer, Fred DeCordova, interviewed for the book King of the Night by Lawrence Lemur, Carson was especially bothered about this incident becoming part of blooper specials because it went against his carefully kept image of cool composure. What really annoyed Carson wasn't just the scare itself. It was becoming the joke on his own show, something he worked hard to avoid.
8. The Defecating Marmoset. One of Carson's earliest animal problems happened in 1969 when animal handler Joan Embry brought a marmoset onto the show. The tiny primate seemed calm until Embry put it on Carson's shoulder. Without warning, the marmoset climbed onto Carson's perfectly styled hair, his pride and joy, and started to urinate. Carson's look of shock and disgust was real as he felt the warm liquid dripping down his neck. Always quick with a joke, Carson said, "I've had people pee on my parade before, but never on my head." But backstage, he was furious, immediately showering and having his hair professionally restyled before the show's second part. Carson especially hated this moment because it damaged the dignified, in-control image he worked so hard to keep. After this incident, animal handlers were given strict rules about what could and couldn't happen with their animals on set.
7. Madonna's lingerie interview.
In June 1987, pop star Madonna made her first ever talk show appearance on The Tonight Show. From when she walked onto the set wearing a black bustier as outer clothing, Carson seemed slightly thrown off. What made this appearance especially uncomfortable for Carson was being forced to deal with Madonna's purposely provocative style and comments while keeping his image as America's most trusted TV host. At one point, Madonna even said she had chosen Carson's show for her first talk show appearance because, as she said, "I thought you should be my first." While Carson went along with the suggestive conversation, backstage he expressed frustration that the interview had gone so far from his preferred style of guest interaction. As Tonight Show writer Andrew Mickles later said in TV Guide, Johnny preferred guests who would have actual conversation rather than simply perform their public persona. The Madonna appearance showed a generation and culture clash that Carson found hard to handle. He was forced to choose between appearing old-fashioned or supporting a level of sexuality he wasn't entirely comfortable showing on his show.
6. Milton Berle taking over the show. TV pioneer Milton Berle, known as Uncle Milty to many viewers, appeared on The Tonight Show in 1965. What happened was a perfect example of an old-style performer refusing to give up the spotlight. Berle, who came from vaudeville and early TV, where performers fought for every second of screen time, basically took over the show. He interrupted Carson over and over, told long stories without letting Carson speak, and even started directing the band and cameras himself. For Carson, who took pride in controlling his program, Berle's bossy behavior was unbearable. Though he stayed composed on air, backstage Carson exploded, telling his producer never to book Berle without clear instructions about respecting the show's rules. This incident helped lead to Carson's well-known gatekeeping of which comedians would be invited to sit on the couch after performing, a special honor that he would deny performers who didn't respect his boundaries.
5. Myrtle Young's potato chip joke gone bad. Not all uncomfortable moments came from difficult celebrities. Sometimes Carson's own pranks backfired badly. In 1987, an older woman named Myrtle Young came on the show to show her collection of potato chips that looked like famous people. After showing several examples, Carson asked her to step away briefly while they got ready for the next part. While her back was turned, Carson reached under his desk, pulled out a regular potato chip, and took a loud, crunching bite. Myrtle turned around in shock, thinking he had eaten one of her precious collectibles, and almost fell down on set. Her real distress was so bad that Carson immediately felt sorry about the prank. As written in the book Johnny Carson by his longtime lawyer, Henry Bushkin, Carson later told his staff he regretted this moment, saying it was a cruel thing to do to a nice lady. The look of instant regret on his face was clear as he quickly comforted Myrtle, explaining it was just a regular chip. This incident bothered Carson for years after. According to Tonight Show writer Andrew Nichols in a 2012 PBS interview, Carson sometimes mentioned it as an example of a joke he wished he could undo. This was a rare admission for a host who rarely acknowledged mistakes. 4. Chevy Chase's unfriendly interview. In 1986, comedian Chevy Chase came on The Tonight Show to promote his film Three Amigos. What should have been a normal promotional talk quickly became uncomfortable as Chase's well-known ego took control. From when he sat down, Chase acted superior, talking over Carson and taking over the interview. The tension became obvious when Chase started directing his answers to the audience instead of talking with Carson, which was a major late-night TV rule violation. Carson, always professional, stayed composed, but viewers who knew his habits could see the clear signs of his annoyance. His jaw tightened, his smile looked forced, and he drummed his pencil on the desk. Behind the scenes, after Chase left, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I don't need that kind of trouble in my life. Let him go on one of the other shows."
3. Bob Hope's constant self-promotion. Johnny Carson's most common guest was comedy icon Bob Hope, who came on The Tonight Show more than anyone else. But viewers at home didn't know that Carson secretly dreaded when Hope would visit. While Hope was clearly an American legend, by the 1970s and 80s, his Tonight Show visits had become predictable and painfully rehearsed. Hope would come out, tell prepared jokes no matter what Carson asked, show a clip to promote his newest NBC special, and then leave, all without any real conversation. For Carson, who was great at natural wit, these mechanical appearances were the opposite of good TV. Behind the scenes, when producers told Carson that Hope wanted to appear again, Johnny would clearly deflate, asking, "Again?" But he never felt he could say no to the network's biggest star. What made these visits especially uncomfortable was Hope's fading abilities in his later years. As his vision and hearing got worse, Hope would often answer questions in the wrong order or completely miss Carson's signals. According to Tonight Show producer Peter Lasley, after one especially awkward visit,
Carson said he hoped someone would shoot him if he ever ended up like that.
2. Sally Field's overly emotional moment. Actress Sally Field appeared on The Tonight Show shortly after winning her second Academy Award for Places in the Heart. During the interview, when Carson asked about her Oscar win, Field became unexpectedly emotional and started crying while discussing how much the recognition meant to her after years of being dismissed as just a TV actress. While Carson was typically good with emotional guests, this moment became increasingly uncomfortable as Field's tears turned into heavy sobbing. Carson, never particularly comfortable with deep emotional displays, awkwardly patted her hand and tried to lighten the mood with humor, but his jokes only seemed to make things worse. The audience fell silent, unsure how to react, and Carson visibly struggled to navigate the situation. He offered her tissues and tried to transition to a lighter topic, but the damage was done. Behind the scenes, Carson later admitted to his staff that he felt helpless during emotional breakdowns on his show, saying, "Give me a difficult comedian any day over someone crying their heart out." What Carson particularly disliked about this moment was feeling powerless to fix the situation and the dead air that followed as he scrambled to regain control of the show's tone.
1. Zaza Gabor's inappropriate flirtation. Hungarian actress and socialite Zaza Gabor appeared on The Tonight Show numerous times throughout the 1970s and 80s, and her appearances often made Carson visibly uncomfortable. During a particularly awkward 1973 appearance, Gabor's aggressive flirtation crossed professional boundaries in ways that clearly made Carson uneasy. From the moment she sat down, Gabor began touching Carson's arm, playing with his tie, and making overtly sexual comments that went far beyond playful banter. She repeatedly called him darling and lover, and at one point tried to sit on his lap during the interview. Carson, who prided himself on maintaining professional composure, physically had to move his chair back to create distance. What made this moment especially uncomfortable was the audience's mixed reaction. Some laughed, while others grew silent, unsure if they were watching comedy or genuine harassment. Carson tried multiple times to redirect the conversation to Gabor's career, but she persistently steered it back to personal and sexual territory. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly told his producers that future Gabor bookings needed to include clear ground rules about appropriate behavior. What Carson particularly hated about this moment was being put in a position where asserting boundaries might make him look uptight or rude, while allowing the behavior to continue made him deeply uncomfortable on his own show. As Tonight Show writer Raymond Siller later recalled, Carson said after the taping, "There's a difference between being a good sport and being a prop for someone else's act."
The legacy of Carson's uncomfortable moments. These uncomfortable moments reveal something important about Johnny Carson that his polished nightly performances often hid. Behind the charming host was a deeply private man who valued control, professionalism, and keeping clear boundaries between his public and private lives. When those boundaries were crossed, whether by overeager guests, unpredictable animals, or network interference, Carson felt real discomfort. Yet it was exactly in these moments when things didn't go according to plan that viewers got rare glimpses of the real man behind the TV icon. Carson's visible discomfort in these situations made him more human, making him more relatable to the millions who welcomed him into their homes each night. His ability to handle these awkward moments, usually with grace and humor, showed why he remained TV's top host for 3 decades. What's perhaps most revealing is what Carson chose to tolerate versus what he refused to accept. He could laugh off a desk collapse or an animal mishap, but he would not tolerate being physically touched without permission or having his professional judgment questioned by guests. These boundaries spoke to Carson's old-school values and his understanding of the unwritten rules of celebrity. He believed in keeping a certain dignity on air, even when things went wrong.
a standard that many would argue has been lost in today's more confrontational and boundary-pushing entertainment world.
Final thoughts. What these moments teach us about television's golden age. As we look back at these uncomfortable moments from The Tonight Show, we're reminded of a different time in TV. One where even the awkward moments kept a certain elegance. Carson's discomfort was rarely shown directly, but rather through subtle signals. A tightened smile, a drumming pencil, or a perfectly timed cutting remark disguised as a joke. In the end, Johnny Carson's legacy isn't just about the thousands of shows that went perfectly according to plan. It's also about these rare moments when things went off the rails and viewers got to see the human being behind the TV legend. In discomfort, as in success, Carson proved himself to be a master of his craft. These 27 moments remind us that even the most polished performers have their limits. Carson's genius wasn't just in his ability to make great television, it was in his ability to maintain his composure and professionalism even when everything around him was falling apart. That's a lesson modern entertainers could still learn from today. The uncomfortable moments didn't diminish Carson's legacy, they enhanced it. They showed us that behind the perfectly styled hair, the impeccable suits, and the famous smile was a real person with real boundaries, real emotions, and real frustrations. And somehow, that made him even more beloved by the millions who tuned in night after night. Johnny Carson set the standard for late-night television, and these 27 moments prove that his standard included grace under pressure, professionalism in chaos, and the ability to turn even the most awkward situation into memorable television. And that wraps up our look at the 27 moments Johnny Carson hated most during his 30 years on The Tonight Show. What's fascinating is how Carson managed to handle these uncomfortable situations while keeping his status as America's most trusted TV personality. If you enjoyed this journey through late-night TV history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into classic Hollywood stories and forgotten entertainment history. We've got plenty more behind-the-scenes secrets and untold stories coming your way. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 27 moments surprised you the most? Did you watch any of these live when they first aired? Do you think Carson handled these situations well, or could he have done things differently? And what's your favorite Johnny Carson memory? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your stories and perspectives. And hey, if you're hungry for more classic TV content, check out our playlist on the greatest moments in talk show history, or click the video on your screen right now to learn about the feuds that rocked Hollywood in the 1970s and 80s. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today.